Well, I was saying a couple of weeks ago that for Valtteri Bottas and Max Verstappen, this Austrian Grand Prix and this foreshortened, weird 2020 World Championship was going to be a very pivotal race. And so it's proved to some extent for Max, but much more so for Valtteri, because if he's going to do something, if he's going to be a Nico Rosberg to Lewis Hamilton, it's got to start in Austria. And so it proved. Beautiful, beautiful lap by Valtteri. Messed it up at the end, but he had enough margin just to win the pole. Both Mercedes drivers under 1:03. Just spectacular to watch in the new black livery. But it was fascinating, I thought, how the pole fell the way of Valtteri. Because the more you watch at the A1 ring or Zeltweg or Spielberg, whatever you want to call it, the more you watch this very small condensed lap, the more you realize it is, as they say, very, very tricky. For me, the best part of the circuit for watching and looking at differences between the drivers, unquestionably, is from turn 4 through to 6, 7. The rest of it's quite spectacular, high-speed braking, all sorts of things that are good for racing. But in terms of actually watching technique, 4, 5, 6 is where it really comes together, I think, in Austria. And on Valtteri's, what turned out to be Valtteri's pole lap, it was interesting to see how much he asked of that Mercedes coming out of 4. It's what they call a high-speed corner these days. By the time they're on it and the car's kind of balanced and set, it's, I guess, 145, 150 miles an hour, maybe accelerating quickly to 170 on exit. And coming out of 4, which is the downhill right-hander, used to be the Bosch curve, now renamed the Lauda curve, Valtteri asked so much of the car as he came out, and then he had to come back right of centre to get it focused for the next left-hander going into that long left-hander and then down the hill. That's a great bit of road, because if you get that absolutely right, it sets you up for that next sequence. By contrast, if you get it slightly wrong, you're slightly out of kilter over the next 3 or 4 corners. It's a bit like the S's at Suzuka in that respect. Anyway, Valtteri got it perfect that lap, and that was the lap where Lewis had a jink coming out of turn 1, so it was never really going to be a great lap for Lewis Hamilton. But the overriding thought, as you saw Valtteri, was, is he going to be able to reproduce this? And of course he couldn't, because he did ask just then a fraction too much of the car on his next lap out, and we saw what happened. He ran slightly wide and then did a bit of auto-crossing for a bit of fun, bit of Finnish auto-crossing, but he still had the pole by then. The difference between him and Lewis on that section of road is Lewis comes out of 4. You could say maybe he's compromising the car a little bit more than Valtteri. I don't think it is that. I think he's just balancing the car slightly mid-corner with very subtle foot and handwork that we will never see on the onboards with the handwork. And of course, we never see the footwork. And that is the difference. When Lewis comes out of 4, the car is slightly straighter, slightly flatter, and slightly better positioned for the entry into 5, and that will give him a lot more consistency over a race distance, assuming they're driving on the limit, of course. In the race, normally, typically, they'll be, second and a half off the pace. But for Valtteri, if he's in front tomorrow, it'll be a question of just driving around on rails and making sure he doesn't make any mistakes to let Lewis in front of him. But when they were on the absolute limit, on the softest of the 3 Pirelli compounds, that was where it made the difference. And Valtteri got it right once, and then he got it wrong. But that's how fine it was. A little bit the same for Romain Grosjean. He was all over the place. But when he got that set of tyres on finally on the Haas, bit of a weird contrast here, but nonetheless he got it into Q2. So that was a little bit of a parallel there. But for Valtteri, he's much more consistent, of course, a much more refined driver than Romain in so many other ways. So congratulations to Valtteri. I had a feeling that was going to happen, and it'll be interesting to see now how Lewis reacts to that. I suspect he'll be very, very magnanimous, will be magnanimous for sure, but inside he'll be seething. So that was one thing. The other was another key moment in qualifying, of course, was Sebastian Vettel not making it into Q3. Watching him throughout yesterday and all of today, it was the Sebastian that we've always talked about. Now, I got quite a lot of flack when I deigned to suggest that Sebastian hasn't really changed the way he physically drives the car, his style, since the Red Bull days, since the early Red Bull days. And I think that was borne out today, because the way he went off on, it was again turn 4, he was Ving the corner. It's what he does. Really, really good at braking in a slight curve, brakes to a V. But of course, the more he was under pressure, the more he had to get the lap time for Q3 to get into Q3, the later he was having to brake, and eventually it all got the better of him because there isn't a lot of mid-corner manipulation in the way Sebastian drives. And that's as simple as that. Charles Leclerc just made it through in what is obviously a very difficult Ferrari. They're cranking on wing now, it seems, because they're incredibly slow on the straight as well. But he's got a little bit more of this mid-corner manipulation we were just talking about in the Lewis Hamilton sense of the word, and which Max Verstappen has as well. Although for Max, it's been a slightly different weekend because the Red Bull looks to be a very edgy car to drive, and he's had to use all his finesse and refinement just to keep the thing relatively square and flat on the road. It's been great to watch in the sense that it's not a great racing car right now. On the other side of the coin, he's making it all look relatively straightforward because by the time he's done all this manipulation, the car doesn't really look out of line very much. You just suddenly see it spearing off, and then you know how much on the edge they are at Red Bull in terms of the grip versus straight line speed, in terms of balance and drivability. And of course, a very, very good lap by Max to qualify third eventually. Great place for him to be. The two Mercedes around him going into the first corner. He will love that situation. He's a real racer, of course. But at the same time, half a second around a lap as short as the Red Bull ring, that just shows how much advantage Mercedes have. It's probably a greater margin now, dare I say it, than they've ever had over the last 5 or 6 years. Just amazing how good Mercedes were from the minute they first turned a wheel. Massive thumbs up too for Lando Norris of McLaren. I suggested in the build-up to this race that this was going to be a very, very important year too for Lando, now that he knows his teammate is the next Ferrari driver. What a motivation for him always to be there or thereabouts, cramping Carlos's style. And therefore, with every day, really, that will put up the stock of Lando Norris. And so it proved in qualifying in Austria. Just sublime, almost under the radar. He just looks so in sync with what he was doing. This was a Lewis Hamilton style lap from Lando Norris. Shouldn't underplay that. He's driving beautifully and getting better all the time. Incredible confidence, very, very good approach to racing, the way he handles the team, the way he's handling the situation. Just wonderful to watch. And I think by rights, you'd have to say that the racing points, at least one of them, should have been ahead of the quickest McLaren. But there was Lando Norris showing just how much talent he has. If you had, for example, Lando and, I don't know, George Russell in the racing points, I don't know where you would have seen them. Having said all of that, I think we need to be full of praise yet again for all the key guys at Racing Point. Of course, what used to be Force India, by which I mean, in no particular order, the Andys, Andy Stevenson, Andy Green, of course, Tom McCullough. I think Otmar Stefanow deserves a lot of praise as well for the way he's kept it all together. They've got their financial support now from the Stroll family. And the natural reaction to that, whether or not you would ever admit it, whether or not you would ever even talk about it, is we've got our money at last. Now we can go motor racing. And you just relax slightly. It doesn't appear that that has happened at all. What appears to have happened instead is that the team have got together and said, right, we will make this the best possible race team we can have. We will have a car that'll be uncomplicated. We'll take as much from the Mercedes as we possibly can. It won't be a customer car. We'll still do this, we'll still do that. But it'll be pretty much based on what Mercedes have been doing. We'll let them show us what to do. And then we'll take two drivers, neither of whom won a Grand Prix, and we will make them look like they are running right at the front and capable of running at the front. And that is the motivation. They're getting the best from Sergio Perez. They're getting the best from Lance Stroll. I particularly love the way they kept Lance out of the traffic in qualifying. Whenever he was out, they always made sure he was out of sync with the rest of the grid, the rest of the pit lane, and he had a nice clear track, because it's enough to think about. When you've got a good car, you've got a short lap, you can't make mistakes, you've got to show that everything has been worth it. And it worked. It was really, really good management. That was very typical, I think, of the way this team always goes motor racing. There is no sign at all of them getting fat on the money that's coming in. Really, really impressive to watch.